Hello, everyone. Today, I'd like to talk about the overview of research process, about how people conduct the research and how you will conduct the research on your own in your fourth year. So, even though there is no specific order to conduct the research in general, but research typically starts with a question. And for your fourth year project or dissertation, you will be provided with a list of research questions to choose from. As you can see, some of the previous sample questions here. In case you don't find an interesting topic from the list, then of course you can come up with your own ideas and discuss it with one of the supervisors. In fact, it is always best to work with your own curiosity. However, once you pick your topic to work with, then you still need to do something more about it to make it more clearly defined and focused before you actually get to work with the topic. Right, so you first need to have your research question ready and suitable for your research. Um, so scientific research typically starts with a specific hypothesis. It is not always the case, but many times, if you're looking for, how things occur and why things occur, then your research starts with a specific hypothesis, which is basically a fancy word for a scientific question that should be testable and falsifiable. So briefly, the testability of a hypothesis means that a hypothesis should generate specific expectations or predictions that can be tested with practical means or tools. So, for example, if we say to do such and such to test an idea, then we should be able to expect or predict a certain outcome or result to follow or be observed. And secondly, um, a hypothesis should be falsifiable or refutable, um, of which concept was first introduced by a British philosopher named Karl Popper in 1959. So, in short, falsifiability arises when a set of relevant observations, um, so meaning that when you collect the data, um, then you should be able to judge after you collect the data if the data or the collected evidence is either consistent or inconsistent with the hypothesis. Uh, in fact, no scientific idea is ever once and for all proven to be true. So even the very well-known scientific knowledge, theories, ideas that we think established long time ago and accepted as facts are still open to constant challenges and empirical validations. Therefore, the hypothesis can only be shown to be wrong, so any scientific idea can only be supported, modified, or even be rejected by data or evidence. So let's consider the following statement as a kind of sample hypothesis to illustrate what makes a hypothesis testable or falsifiable. So say you have this conviction that dogs are better than cats. Personally, I love cats more than I do dogs, and I can probably give you 100 reasons why I do so. But all these reasons can be subjective and it is not measurable. So let's try to be scientific here and think about the statement, whether it can be qualified as scientific hypothesis based on the two qualities that a hypothesis need to have, the testability and falsifiability. Well, if you think about it, the statement is very difficult to test or refute, if not impossible, because it is too vague and somewhat too general, right? So let's fix this statement in a way that we can test and falsify by way of measuring things or collecting some evidence. So now let's change the hypothesis, and now it says the dogs are better than cats in climbing trees. Well, now this sounds a bit more specific than before, as now we know that the what aspect of the animals we say better at. However, I think we need to be a little bit more specific about what we mean by better, as it can mean many different qualities. So now the hypothesis is changed to say that dogs are faster instead of just better than cats in climbing trees. So this way, you can probably agree that now we can finally test this hypothesis by measuring how fast they can climb a tree. So after we gather the data, then we can use them to show whether the hypothesis is supported or not. Of course, there are other details you need to think about. For example, which breed will be representing each camp. So, um, with with respect to dogs, should it be the beagle or poodle be representing the dogs, or how about Scottish fold for cats? And there are other things you need to actually uh, define some other details to make this hypothesis more clear. But as we will see later, this process of making your research hypothesis suitable for actual testing is called operationalization. So we've talked about this, the requirements of hypothesis. Then what is kind of a practical ways to make a hypothesis a good one? So here are some tips. So first, you know that you have a good research hypothesis when it is focused and clearly stated. And also, it's always better to have a well-defined single hypothesis rather than multiple hypotheses, especially if this is your first time doing research. Well, not every research can have specific hypothesis because if the nature of your research is mainly descriptive or qualitative, then you probably don't have a specific question to test the hypothesis by gathering or collecting the data. But even for that kind of exploratory hypothesis-free studies, uh, you still need to have at least a purpose, aim, or goal for your study so that um, the audience knows that your hypothesis is clearly identifying and explaining why you're doing what you're doing.